Aloha and welcome. In this chapter, we're going to be getting into authentication factors. We alluded to that in our last section on the principles. So we're going to dive into what authentication factors are. I mentioned a little bit about it, like something you know, something you have, something you are. We're going to go a little bit more in depth here. So with authentication factors, we're talking about evidence that a user can provide to prove they are who they claim to be. So we have five common authentication factors. One is a knowledge factor. This is what you're most probably, uh, you're the factor that you're most familiar with. This is going to be something that you know, like a password or a PIN number, something like that. So we call this knowledge factor. It's called a knowledge factor, but it's something you know. The other thing is possession factor, and that's something you have. So this is going to be something that the user possesses or owns, and it's going to be something like a smart card or maybe a mobile phone. So if you've ever gone to a bank account and tried to log in and they said, hey, we're going to send you a text message. So you get the key code in your text message and then you plug that in and yay, you're into your account. So that's the possession factor, and it's counting on you to possess something like a mobile phone or a smart card. The other thing is inherence factor. So inherence is basically meaning that you have it. It's something that you are. So this is going to be a unique physical characteristic that you have, like your fingerprint, your voice print, your retina, iris patterns, things like that. So think about the retinal scanner when you look into it and looks through your eyes. That's something you are. We have another one that's kind of cool. It's called location factor, and that one's going to be somewhere you are, and they're going to term that using your location. So you can use your GPS coordinates or maybe even the IP address of your user device. Um, some things like I used to work with CRM, and CRM had ways of locking people out or restricting them to only certain IP address ranges. So if you were physically located in the building and you had a certain IP address, then it knew that you were okay, so it would allow you in. Another thing is the behavior factor, and that's something that you can do. So it's an action that a user performs, and that can be a hand gesture like a Jedi, you haven't seen us here, you haven't seen us here kind of thing. Or it could be, like a drawing pattern or something like that on a device's screen. So that's behavior factor, something that you can do. And we'll take a look at that right here in our participation activity. So we start out and we look and it says, a knowledge factor is something you know, such a password or PIN. And going on, the inherence factor is something you are, such a fingerprint or an iris pattern. So it's got a nice little fingerprint there. And then a possession factor is something you have, such as a smart card like this, or a security token. Then the behavior factor is something you can do, such as a drawing pattern or a hand gesture. I'm guessing this is a hand showing a gesture like over numbers or something like that. And then the last one here is going to be location factor, and that's something you are, and that's why they have the little compass here. So your GPS coordinates or maybe your IP address. Then moving into the test here, I'll let you go ahead and match up these different things. You can do that on your own. And the same for authentication participation here. Password is what kind of a factor, a smart card is what kind of a factor. Go through here, answer those. If you miss them, of course, look into why you got them wrong. It'll give you nice explanations. So then we get into single and multi-factor authentication. This is an area that you're going to have on the test, and it's going to ask you about things it'll be kind of tricky. And there's some great questions in here that test this aspect of it, but expect to see this on the test because it's going to be asking you about how many different authentication factors do you have if you're doing this, 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 and this. So sometimes you find that they give you all these different ways of doing it, but you're only really using one authentication factor using several different things, but it's only really one factor, one type of it. So the idea is that the more authentication factors, different types that you have, the more secure this process of authentication is. So we start out with single factor authentication. That's what most of us do, username and password, that kind of thing. So single factor authentication is an authentication method that uses only one authentication factor to verify a claimed identity. So SFA is the most basic form of authentication and is most often implemented as a password, as I mentioned. It could be that, if they ask for a password and a PIN, then both of these are things that you know. These are knowledge-based KBAs. So unfortunately, that's only really one factor, even though you're remembering a PIN and a password. So it's not that secure. The other thing we have is two-factor authentication, known as 2FA. And 2FA is an authentication method that verifies a user's identity claimed by using two different authentication factors. So an example of that is secured system using 2FA may require like a password and then a verification code that they send to a mobile phone, kind of like the example I gave you of a bank. So here, if you look at this, you've got that Google verification code. If you're ever trying to get into Gmail or something like that and it wants to verify, it'll also send you the code and you have to type in that code. So a smart card can be used for two-factor authentication. So smart card authentication, it can do the authenticating to a secured system by the mere possession of it is a possession factor, and then combining that with a PIN, a knowledge factor, you can get that two-factor just by using a smart card. Um, Also, multi-factor authentication. 2FA is a form of MFA because MFA just means greater than one. So 2FA, the two-factor authentication, also is a type of multi-factor authentication. So keep that in mind. Um, and the security of a system improves as the number of authentication factors to verify a claimed identity increases. But always remember, and this is true in a lot of different areas, the greater the number of authentication factors, it's negatively going to impact the user experience and reduce the system's usability because who wants to go through so many levels of security? So most often, even when we talk about multi-factor authentication, we're really talking about two-factor authentication. I don't think I've ever used three forms of authentication to get into a system. Maybe if you're dealing with the military or some really expensive bank accounts, perhaps or something like that. But in general, when I see MFA implemented, it's usually done as 2FA, just two different types, like password and a text to your phone, or you have to look up in Google Authenticate or something like that. So just keep that in mind. So down here, it's going to have you match up single factor authentication, multi-factor authentication, and two-factor authentication with the definitions. Then down below that, we've got more questions on this. And this is the great, this participation activity here, I really want you to go through carefully because this is the one I was telling you about, where it's going to ask you about different things and see how many different types of authentication you have going on there. And again, if you miss it, it's good because it's going to tell you why that's wrong. But this is very, very good because it'll help you discern what types, how many different authentication factors they're using here. So this is a very good exercise right here. So I'm going to not do a single one of them for you. I'm going to let you go through all six of them on your own. And if you have any trouble with that, if you're having trouble getting the concept, just get in touch with me and I'll help you out. And lastly, we have knowledge-based authentication. So knowledge-based authentication, KBA, it's an authentication method that requires knowledge of a user's personal information to validate a user's claimed identity. So KBA is commonly used in multi-factor authentication systems. There's two types, there's static and there's dynamic. So static KBA is also known as shared secrets or shared secret questions. And that's when you go to a site, often financial, and when you're setting up your account, they're gonna have you create two or three of these pre-agreed set of shared questions, and they'll ask you like, what was your best friend's name, or what was the street that you grew up on, things like that. So you're setting up these questions in advance that you give the answer to. I've actually heard people say, because some of this information is out there on the internet and people can look it up, sometimes it's better to lie and put that in there. But the problem with lying on it and having something that's totally separate, and it's like, hey, I just need to remember that, instead of saying I grew up on, Green Street, I'm supposed to say I was on Blue Street or something like that. You will forget over time. So that's not really a good idea. But anyway, just remember that static KVA is when come up with answers to these static questions. And again, that's a little bit less secure because if it's based on things that are out there publicly, like in open source, like if somebody sees it on your Facebook or if somebody that you grew up with knows what street you grew up on with, that you grew up on, that makes it a little bit less secure, right? So then there's something called dynamic KBA. And dynamic KBA is knowledge-based questions that are not set beforehand with the user. And those can be based on some of the user's public and private information. And some of those things can be like credit reports and history of financial transactions. Like, it can say, and this is, for me, this would be hard because I don't actually know, like, what my balances are on credit cards or personal loans and things like that. But if you're going into the bank or whatever, and their site is asking you, hey, what's your personal loan balance with us or something like that, if you can get it within whatever dollars, maybe that is a valid way of doing it. But just keep in mind, dynamic is going to be based on things that you don't agree to beforehand. It's going to be based on things that you should know. So there's another thing in the middle of all this. They can also create what they call diversionary questions. So diversionary questions are kind of cool because they'll ask you, for example, given these three phone numbers or these four no phone numbers, which one have you never had during your life? So it can pull that information from your history or whatever, or its knowledge base, and then create a totally fake one. And you're supposed to be able to identify the fake one that you haven't had. So that's one type of dynamic KBA as well. So it's called a diversionary question. So down here, go ahead, tell it which is shared secrets, dynamic KBA and static KBA. Remember that static KBA and shared secrets are pretty much synonymous, as you see up here, static KBA, shared secrets. So yeah, keep that in mind. Then down here, knowledge-based questions, you're going to be going through here, responding whether it's static or dynamic. These should be pretty easy to do. Then down here below, again, we get to explore the same thing. This is our challenge activity. You're going to get these two correct, then you're going to hit next and go to the next level and get those right. And once you do it, if you keep on going back and forth to 1 and 2 after you've gotten them all right, it'll keep on giving you different examples. It'll keep generating some, so you can keep practicing these to make sure you've got it down. So that's all we're going to have right here in authentication factors. I hope you understood everything. If you don't, again, feel free, reach out to me, ask me any questions that you have. Do practice, particularly the area on figuring out how many factors are in use. That's really important. So practice those 6 questions I believe they had down here and go through that. Wait, not here, but the other one down here, determining how many different factors are at play. So try that out and let me know if you have any questions. Have a great day. Aloha.